Today, we are joined by two special guests from Edelman Global Advisory. Home of the Edelman Trust Barometer, Edelman has been at the forefront of trust research for over 2 decades. Our guests today are Guiterman and Jeremy Thompson. Aaron has over 25 years of public affairs experience. He has helped high-profile clients navigate tough issues, reputational risks, and political conflicts. Jeremy is a storyteller at heart who helps brands, celebrities, and organizations tell their story to the world. As Senior Vice President with Edelman's Global Public Affairs practice, he specializes in innovative, digital-first content creation, message positioning, and public affairs strategies. So welcome, Jeremy and Aaron. I will let you guys take it away.
Thank you, Darren. I appreciate the kind words and the opportunity to speak with you and the crew today. Jeremy and I have spent quite a bit of time over the past couple of weeks having in-depth conversations on trust and what it means for business, particularly in this uncertain and volatile political time. So we're going to walk through quite a few, 15 slides. We're going to go quick and really look forward to having an open dialogue and conversation with the team to ensure that we're covering as much ground as possible, but also answering your questions and interest areas as they pertain to trust specifically. So, Jeremy, do you want to add anything else, or should we just jump right in?
Let's just jump right in, Aaron.
Great. So Edelman's been studying trust for about 25 years, and we have, longitudinal data throughout that time that we look at on a regular basis, and some key trends that we see, and I think people need to really take into consideration is what trust means and why it matters. When you have established a strong foundation of trust with your key stakeholder groups, whether it's employees, regulators, policymakers, consumers, and key constituencies, right, you're better prepared to handle risk, you're more resilient in the face of crises, and better equipped to unlock the full potential of your corporate and brand across all of your different channels. So when you kind of look at it, right, trust matters to consumers, employers, regulators, investors, provides resilience against risk, better establishes you in your framework and your reputation with the market. But more importantly, and particularly where Jeremy and I come in, and this is key, trusted companies hold up better to media scrutiny, particularly in this uncertain environment. So as we walk through the data on AI, we will talk through what this means to business in that context of trust. So according to our 2023, the shift from 2023 to 2024, and if you look at this is the global general population levels of trust from 2023 versus 2024. We've seen in the U.S. alone, we've dropped from 41 to 46 which is an index against trust, which is squarely in the people are trusting less in the developed countries. But when you really look at this data year over year, you're now seeing a divide between the East and the West, right? Countries and organizations countries and organizations that operate in those countries that have, less access to free media, free speech, oftentimes controlled by the government, and the narrative is mixed, they're more trusting than those in Western democracies. So when you follow that continuum, just take into consideration Western democracies are less trusting than non-democracies throughout the world. And so when you then break that down, this is just another push in on the global general population, but the US really has fallen in grace. But if you look at what's at the top, China, India, in the middle you have Netherlands, but when you kind of go from that East-West divide, this is the push in that we wanted to show. If we go to the next slide, this is one of the core drivers that we like to that we've seen this year, and we've seen it emerging over time. It is absolutely clear from this data that there is an income-based inequality across markets, right? And we'll break it down for you into some key sound bites. basically we live in an above the line and below the line economy. Those who live above the line and are benefiting from the transition to an innovation economy, right, and are yielding the benefits of technology, AI, and other areas, mostly educated, affluent, elite, regardless of geographic location, are far more trusting than those who live in an industrial economy and are seeing their jobs being offshore, interest rates going up, mortgage rates going up. So there is income inequality that is really splitting the trust measures worldwide, but in particularly in the US. If you look at the US, high income earners are in the kind of neutral trust zone around, 57 or so. But if you look at low income, we're down in the 40s. So this is a really important aspect when we're talking about the context of AI, is that there is income-based inequality and frustrations that one segment of the audience, of the population feels that's not felt by the other. So when we talk about this innovation economy and the promise of innovation to create opportunity, it is not threading down equally throughout the population.
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, I think one of the big takeaways is when we look at trust across the board and the divisions, either the economies or the divisions in Western versus the East, one of the things that we do see is there are several sectors across the world that are trusted and one that are not as trusted. And so when we look at our trust data, we see the tech sector is one of the highest trusted sectors overall, beating healthcare, food and beverage, and energy. Now, one thing I want to point out here is tech doesn't mean social media. In fact, social media is not very trusted at all in our trust barometer study for 2 years in a row now. But one thing that we want to point out here is just because technology as a sector is trusted, that doesn't necessarily mean that the tech that comes out of that, like artificial intelligence, is trusted too. So we can't take that for granted. And while we go through the next couple of slides, we're going to talk through why this is the case. But just because your sector is trusted doesn't mean the products that come out of it are necessarily trusted with society as a whole. A couple of examples that come to mind as we dig deeper is that we also see that there is a political divide across the board, whether that's going to be for rejecting or embracing innovation. In fact, among Republicans, because we're in the middle of a political season, there is more rejection and less enthusiasm for emerging technologies. If you look here, you will see that both Republicans and Democrats reject AI as an innovation overall, but Republicans are much more skeptical of that across the board. This is very important because when you look at, say, green energy, for example, you see another divide politically. And if you look at gene-based medicine, you also see something similar. But we want to point this out because GMO foods, which have been around for several decades at this point, is still solidly in the innovation-rejected sector, which is why it's critically important that as we're communicating and looking towards how we can get trusted, that we start this early, because this trend can continue if it's not addressed in the right way and solidly hurt the innovation as we move forward. The next thing I want to share here is that as AI innovation speeds up, trust in those companies producing that innovation does go down. Now, globally, we see a little bit of a flattening in 2023 to 2024, but we've seen that decrease. But in the United States especially, this has been a decrease by about 15 points, year over year, and we're seeing it go down. This is important because I think, we had thought for a while that the social media companies, which once again aren't a part of tech, but their motto was move fast and break things for the pursuit of innovation and to make money. But we're seeing a similar phase happen with tech companies when it comes to things like generative AI and other tools that are being used. I think now there's not an app that exists that doesn't have AI as part of its platform. But we're seeing that as that technology comes out faster and faster and faster at an exponential level, that people are just saying they don't trust that technology and they're not trusting the companies that are producing that. And so there's a lot of reasons for this, but we have to keep this in mind because it's not enough just to make really cool things that are shiny and that are useful.
And Jeremy, it's important to say, bottom line, the going back to the other slide that we were on, the IQ for AI is low, right? And so fundamentally speaking, when you think about the narrative in relation to AI, if we go to the next slide, it has been commanded by the power of storytelling, but in the pejorative, right? If you really look at the sensational media environment, headlines are not only conditioning the environment on what AI means to society, but it's also fueling perceptions. We looked at a cross-section of business media on the conservative and the more progressive side. We looked at business media. We looked at like traditional established media, as well as some more digitally focused policy media. And, you know, time and time again, the headlines, you know, from the New York Times, big tech is bad, big AI will be worse. Behind the curtain, Axios, what AI architects fear the most. So the narrative right now is focusing on the potential harm that AI can drive, particularly in the context of this election year, when the real benefits of AI are being overshadowed by this, right? AI will accelerate therapeutic treatments. We all agree that technology and AI is part of the solution to the transition to a lower carbon future. We understand that it can create efficiencies in logistics and better product manufacturing, better natural resource utilization. Across the board, AI can extend technology and deliver that promise of innovation and create opportunity throughout society. But the narrative is focused on the sensational negative because that's what sells headlines, right? So with that said, when you start thinking about, okay, well, AI is new, the IQ and fear related to AI is driven by the media, right? But business is using it on a day-to-day basis, and we know it's going to be integrated into our daily lives. So with that said, stakeholders across the board agree that regulation is necessary for innovation acceptance, particularly in related to AI. 60% of our respondents agree and come to consensus that business and government must partner when it comes to the development of pragmatic, responsible policies and regulations for AI, right? And so when you kind of think about that, you can't get 60% to agree on much these days, right? But it's statistically stable against the sample. And when we really start thinking about it, as that IQ of AI increases and people start seeing the positive benefits it can deliver, it's going to be absolutely essential that business work sets the table for government, because there is no table right now. I think there's like 50 odd bills in California, another 200 throughout the US on AI that aren't going anywhere. But the table needs to be set by business and work with regulators, and constituencies and consumers and stakeholders expect that to happen. So it's a real leadership moment for business, NGOs, nonprofits, and other entities that are focused on AI to begin to bridge that divide with government to be able to create some pragmatic policies moving forward. On the bottom of this slide is this kind of chart Jeremy and I usually debate on how to read it. But at the end of the day, right, if you look at the delta between low acceptance and high acceptance, it's pretty wide, right? And so the rejection of AI and innovation and the embracing innovation is very narrow. So there's a lot of work to be done in education on AI moving forward.
Yeah. And the reality is like, we talk about education, but there's some key things that we're worried about when it comes to this technology globally as a whole. The number one thing you probably think about first is AI could take my job. And while that's a valid concern, overall, the world totally is thinking about a few other things in addition to that. Number one on the list is that AI and the technology behind it could compromise my privacy. It could devalue what it means to be human, and it could be harmful to people. Across the board, we're seeing those are the three things that in both developed and developing nations that people are focused on. Overall, the question is, could it hurt me in a meaningful way? And so these are things we're going to have to address over time as we continue to innovate and iterate and ideate on this technology. The thing is though, we're not saying you focus on the top three only. The reality is all of these are valid. We should be talking about job security and job loss at the same time while we're talking about AI, because it's very important. In fact, when we talk to employees specifically, so inside the company of these tech companies, people say that their CEO, their tech CEO, has to talk about the technology ethics, job skills of the future, which is that common frame we're seeing, but also what that automation is going to mean for jobs. So if we bring in, a generative AI tool, how's that going to impact me as a member of the team? What is that going to mean for my productivity? How's that going to impact me at the end of the day? There's a large conversation happening right now about that sense of self and what does it mean for me overall.
And us.
Yeah, and us, yeah.
Right. So when you look at the data, it's pretty cool to see that while those key attributes and emotional drivers on AI are in the top 10, the first 4 or 5 are about the impact on society and about us as a community. And then when you get further down the list, it's then personalized as me. So I think that respondents and constituencies are looking at AI through the right lens. How is it going to impact society first? How is it going to impact me second? By the way, I want to talk to my CEO and see what he or she has to say, because ultimately it's about my community and my future as well.
Yeah. And then just one more thing here is to continue that is if we're going to accept the technology, we have to tell the right story. And that's exactly what Aaron said. What it means for society, how's it going to benefit me? And then also a third thing, how's it going to save me some money too? If it's going to save me time, it's got to save me money. So over to Aaron on the conclusion here.
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, we're covering, we're doing the survey course on AI and trust, but I think the key points are, right, we need to restore trust in AI innovation. I think we all can agree that we're at a moment in time where there's a referendum on technology right now happening in front of us, not just at the federal US level, but globally. Trust in technology is decreasing quickly. And in order for us to restore trust in the sector and really push in to AI and innovation, transparency is absolutely critical, right? Communicating not just the innovations themselves and the R&D that goes into it, but the true impact it's going to have within the communities that business serves, not just their employees and their customers, but the community at large and their downstream and upstream vendors and suppliers, right? So the benefits of emerging tech are being overshadowed by the negative storylines. So in order to establish trust, we need to start being very transparent on the benefits as well as the drawbacks on AI and innovation. I think the second point, listen, AI is personal, right? So when you think about concerns around privacy are the top impact and job security, bottom line, it boils down to this. If the promise of innovation in AI is to create opportunity, we need to show it's happening. So when, reskilling is a priority, tech transfer to the United States and other geographies and emerging geographies is happening. How do we bring benefits of technology to underserved and under-resourced communities within the United States? And then what role does technology play in that? In order for tech to be trusted and AI to be trusted, it needs to create an emotional connection, right? And that emotional connection right now is unfortunately fear-based and driven by the media and the critics of AI. Right. I think the third key finding, listen, tech employees trust their employers and expect their CEOs to speak out. Jeremy, you and I spoke about this earlier, where the most trusted entity in our surveys for the past few years has been business. But what has really emerged to the top is my CEO, not CEOs in general. So when you think about it, you walk in and out of a business every day for a reason, and you have an inherent trust within that ecosystem that you work every day. So trusting your CEO and your leadership team is absolutely essential. So within the framework of AI or any sector that leverages AI, going back to point 1, transparency, message needs to come from the top, but be felt all the way down throughout the ecosystem. And then 4, and this is the most important part when we're staring down the barrel of these elections, is regulation becomes necessary for innovation to be acceptance. And when you think constituents expect business and technology to work together on regulations, that table needs to be set, and it needs to be set deliberately with the innovators, the lawmakers, the regulators, the pundits, in order to shape key regulation. There was a piece that came out, I think, a couple months ago in the FT, and it was like AI is in its Red Queen moment, right? Where we are in our Red Queen moment. You need to run as fast as you can to stay in the same place that you are. But the real question in that is, what are the regulations and who are the regulators? And with that, we'll yield the floor to the chairman, Darren. And we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Aaron and Jeremy. That was really interesting to see you to talk about the data. We had a few questions come in so far that I will go through. If anyone else has any other questions, put them in the Q&A or go there to upvote some questions that you saw. So one of the first questions that we saw come in, I don't think this is particular to AI, but I did think it was interesting. They asked, does trust have an expiration date? In other words, how much does trust fade over time? And is that time frame different for distrust?
So I think trust is on a continuum. It doesn't have an expiration date because your brand often speaks for yourself when you're not in those rooms or not in those conversations. Trust is elastic, right? And so when you think about the elasticity of trust in moments where you're trusted, you're really not stretched very thin. But as issues emerge, that trust is pulled to points oftentimes where it can snap, and we've seen that happen because there is a compact, an unspoken compact between consumers and brands, between business and society, between government and the constituencies they serve. And so it's delicate and it needs to be managed in a very deliberate fashion because, once you lose trust, it's very hard to get it back. But my old boss used to say something really profound to me. And she said, we were in this crisis situation and the client's like, what's the story for us to get out of this mess? And she said very clearly, you can't talk your way out of the way you behave, right? So behavior and the way you act as an organization or an individual or brand speaks volumes about who you are and what you stand for. Storytelling is key in those moments, but the way you act really determines the levels of trust that you have in society. I don't know, Jeremy, you want to add to that?
No, I think you're exactly correct. I mean, I always think about it. I know we're talking about businesses and brands and, institutions as a whole, but, does your trust with your best friend have an expiration date? You constantly reevaluate, you constantly recommit. And if that trust is broken, it's very hard to get back. And so the answer to that is it does at some point, but you really have to do what Aaron just said. And that is, make sure that you're constantly building and ideating on that at the end of the day.
All right, then the next question that I'll take, this is we'll go to Sarah Lloyd. So Sarah Lloyd asked a very specific question is, what is your opinion of Chevron being overturned and how would that make it more difficult to come to a consensus for unified governance of AI innovation in tech? Any opinions there?
Yeah, I think the larger question here when it comes to just the way we've seen laws enforced and the conversation we've been having just as a nation as a whole is, where are we going when it comes to regulating and enforcement across the board? Tech is one of those things that has made Congress very nervous over the past few years. And I think what we saw in the last decade was we saw an administration really not doing too much to manage the trust that might exist, right? But when we look at the latest administration, we're seeing a lot more work being done in that regard. And so one of the things that we're looking at just overall when it comes to just how we're enforcing and how we're interpreting laws and the roles that administrations and agencies are playing is that they're constantly evolving. And I think it's really important that we do understand that the environment in which we're working on is completely fluid, and that it is critically important that we have a handle on how we're communicating these efforts to the public. Look, at the end of the day, a lot of the big tech and a lot of the tech lawsuits and a lot of the tech conversations revolve around, do I trust technology to help me at the end of the day? And so I think, when I look overall at the landscape, whether that be a legislative landscape or judicial landscape, it does come back to those fundamental questions at the end of the day.
Sure. I agree. I mean, and listen, not being an attorney, Sarah, good to see your voice. I mean, your name pop up on screen. It's important to understand that a well-framed argument that clearly articulates the benefits to society of any technology or innovation, this should not really be that much of a hurdle, right? Gaining consensus is already difficult. We had a conversation last night about what's lost in Washington, D.C. What's lost in Washington, D.C., from my opinion, is the art of diplomacy and compromise.
Sure.
Right. And so with Chevron, the Chevron being overturned, it just makes it that more important to act with transparency, to be deliberate in the impact as well as the potential drawbacks of any innovation, and then build coalitions, right? Be able to work with and collaborate with lawmakers, regulators, to ensure that the innovation is not, and the technology and AI is not being used adversarially just against the United States and against the communities you serve. The benefits of AI, like I said earlier, are completely overshadowed by the negative narrative.
Sure.
But the health sector, the food and ag sector, the energy sector, the national security ecosystem, will all benefit from AI, but we need to be able to implement the technology and regulate it in a responsible fashion.
Aaron, I would probably say to feedback there, like Congress might have to get a little more specific about how they write regulations, which means you can't do your paper at 11:59 at night. You might need some more time to do that. My students always turn in papers right before. You can always tell it's like 11:59, like 10 papers come in. So they might need some more time to do this.
They may. Well, so I think the other point, and this is I don't know, Jeremy, where we picked this up at one of the conferences we were in, but the idea came to mind that, listen, digital is moving faster, right, than our legislative and regulatory system, right? And our legislative and regulatory system is moving at an analog pace. There needs to be a course correction on the process and the speed of the process to match the speed, or at least be able to handle the speed of technology. One is outpacing the other, and I think that's why it's critical that lawmakers and regulators are business partners with lawmakers and regulators to showcase the benefits of the innovation so that we can pass long-term responsible innovation regulations.
I'm going to jump to another question that's right along the same topic from Pearson. And Pearson asked, how do we create regulation so that it does not stunt the growth of AI and keeps innovation going?
That is literally the magic question that not just the US, but the world has been trying to figure out for the past few years, especially with AI. So one of the biggest things we saw when President Biden sent out his executive order on AI and technology was that it tried to strike a balance between there might be some dangers of the technology that we haven't thought of yet, but also we want the private sector to invest and iterate on this technology. And so I think there's like maybe about 3 factors that we think about just globally of how we can kind of do two things at once, right? The first is make sure you're partnering with the private sector, as Aaron had just said, to make sure that they understand that like they play a key role in the regulatory process. Now, easier said than done, right? Because the reality is all of these companies want to move as fast as possible, but they've been asking Congress for frameworks. And so there is an attitude and an appetite for some sort of guardrail, because the reality is social media companies, tech companies, any organization wants to have an influence in that lawmaking process. So the first thing is working closely with lawmakers is the first thing, so you understand what's at stake. The second thing, though, is that the federal government and the institutions at play who are in charge of enforcing and writing the policymaking and regulatory frameworks need to be flexible with how they build things. I think there is this sense, and this is just how policy works, is you pass some legislation and it is just on the books for several years, decades, a couple centuries maybe, and that it's not necessarily malleable to the times. I think we need to pass humble legislation that enables us to go back and fix and tweak and ideate at the same time. But, unfortunately, our institutions, they move slow on purpose. The founders and the framers made it that way. And so it is a little more difficult. And the third thing I think that's really important here is like we really need to make sure that we are paying attention we are paying close attention to the consumer, the voter, which is like the fourth big check on government. You have to know what people are thinking about the technology and where it goes. The federal government spends a lot of time thinking about national defense when it comes to AI. We have, Biden's executive order spends so much time talking about how we can evaluate if things are threats to technologies by establishing red and blue teams to evaluate, stuff coming out of the private sector. But the reality is, if citizens don't feel safe, if they feel like a technology is moving too fast, they will punish the government for not putting that regulation in place, which then means that the government is being reactive to technology and not proactive. So I think by working with tech companies, by passing legislation that could be ideated and iterated and evolve over time, and making sure you have your pulse on the population, those are three ways we can kind of try and strike that balance. And it won't be a perfect balance by any means, but at least we won't have to suffer the consequence as citizens every day to a stunted technology field. Because the reality is, a lot of AI comes from the United States, but other companies across the world are making this too. And I would feel kind of safer with American AI at the end of the day. And I think the federal government looks at that as an investment too.
And also, just one thing to add, constituencies and the system overall fears change.
Yeah.
Right? These big inflection points of technological change disrupt the established systems. So to answer the question, right, which is a really complicated question, the value of policy working groups is understated at this moment in time, right? And I'm not saying just the tech companies getting together and framing out the policy implications and draft language, but really sitting down with the key stakeholders who need to take a 360-degree view of AI and its impacts, and diversify those working groups with different voices and key influentials in those areas, right? So from a national security perspective, CSIS, right, being at the table with one of the technological innovators in AI makes a lot of sense, right? And really scenario planning against not just the negative implications and aspects of AI, but more so in the positive, right? Because oftentimes regulations are developed as a response to something, not to forecast something. So forecasting is the toughest job that we have, and looking around corners on emerging issues and risk. But more importantly, like the trends and the dynamics we'll see 12, 24, 36 months from now on AI. But if you get the right people around a table and work as a coalition or a working group, I think it makes a lot of sense.
More meetings, right?
More meetings.
More meetings.
Right. This next question I thought was really interesting. It has to do with storytelling. So you had a slide about the trust gap between higher and lower income individuals. So this person asked, how does storytelling differ when targeting higher and lower income individuals?
Well, you knowing your audience is absolutely essential in communicating in this environment. And within policy, politics, brand, communications, issue advocacy, and NGO work, when you're trying to reach your stakeholders, oftentimes they're now living in worlds where like they're self-fulfilling when it comes to the content they see, right? And a lot of folks are seeing the content that validates their position but doesn't verify the truth, right? And so those ecosystems that have been creative in the technology sphere are really important to understand, but also break down. Because if you have a story that needs to resonate across different audience segments, different socioeconomic groups, different geographies, different cultures, you're going to gain your best traction and momentum and building trust with those audiences if you practice message discipline, really playing to your true value and history and foundation of how the organization or the brand was built upon, but making it nuanced. You can't just be multi-audience. You have to be multi-nuanced, right? You need to be able to connect with audiences at a place of shared values. So you can have one master message, but you need to be able to communicate it in a way that's relevant to each one of those subsegments across a channel strategy that reaches those subsegments, and then bringing them into the fold in a uniform way in order to tell stories that drive and shape the favorable outcome that you're looking for. So when you look at income splits, media consumption breaks by a lot of different habits, not just by demographic data like that, but you really need to take a deep look at what audiences you're engaging, what behavioral attributes, what shared values that they have with your organization or your brand, but more importantly, what emotional triggers that can you speak true to yourself that connects with them where you can make that link, right? So from my perspective, this all goes back to the whole narrative on behavioral targeting and really understanding not just your brand and the demographics, but you need to know the values, beliefs, and behaviors of your consumers or your audiences in order to move them in your direction.
Yeah, that's right.
Very interesting answer. Thank you, Aaron. Next, so we have a couple more questions in here. If anyone else still has other questions out there, make sure to get them into the Q&A so Jeremy and Aaron can get to them. So this next question is about from an anonymous person. They asked, any advice on getting buy-in from my CEO? My CEO is still skeptical of the benefits of AI.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I find lunch is very compelling when trying to get buy-in from people. No, but in all seriousness, I think one of these things that we've learned over the past few years that AI has been entering the national stage from a consumer level is that often finding case studies of how it operates in very similar ways is critical to get people to understand what the value is. I think that one of the things that often happens is that we enter a room and we're generally skeptical that something is right for us. But the reality is if we're able to tell and communicate what that means for me specifically, I'm more likely to say, hey, this actually could be something. And what that could mean specifically, I know here, when Aaron and I have conversations about tools that we use specifically, we're always thinking about, what is our goal at the end of the day? How is this technology or resource going to help us reach that goal? And the last thing is what is the adoption rate going to look like? It's great to have a shiny brand new tool, but if you don't see how it's going to enhance productivity or bottom line for a client or the work that we're doing, then we're not going to buy in. And so Aaron doesn't know this, but whenever I go into meetings with him, I figure out what is the story I'm trying to tell and how am I going to get that story to resonate with Aaron, who I know has spent, I was going to say generations on political campaigns, but I don't want to.
Thank you.
But someone who I know really cares about, at the end of the day, how's this going to benefit the people we're serving at the end of the day? And so I think understanding what that audience is, the business impact personally, and the rate of adoption is critically important. I think one of the coolest things that we're seeing right now is that a lot of those case studies do exist for simple things. And I always say start small. There's no need to build an AI employee who's going to sit alongside you and be a helpful tool for good. But if we can use it in some smaller areas, right? Like as a helpful assistant, for example, to help confirm things, or even as an internal indexing tool. It's those little drips that I think really help look for better adoption at the end of the day. But number two, it will probably make your security and IT team happier too, because they know how to build the fortress to protect the infrastructure that needs to be protected whenever you're playing with some of these tools.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the aspects of leveraging any new technology, in particular AI, is what's the business case, right? The short, mid, and long term impact that AI can have on the business is usually the differentiator between getting green light or staying at a red light position. And I'll give you an example, right? There was an organization that used big data, when that was the term of the art, to model when the correct time and trucks should leave their warehousing facilities, how much they should be loaded to maximize fuel utility and reduce carbon emissions. Now that was done in an actuarial model with relatively tight statistical significance against performance. And when they put AI against that same model, they changed the time of day the trucks left by a couple minutes. They changed the weight load by, I don't know how many kilograms, and they increased their efficiency significantly overnight. And that goes right to the bottom line, right? And without sacrificing labor or any jobs. They just had to recalibrate their operational model on how they moved goods across the country. So a direct business impact. And when you think about those decision makers who are using and trying to weave AI into their jobs, they have a job to do. And so if they can showcase that it's going to have a material net positive impact on the business while reducing risk, right? And you have case studies or you have a beta, I think that speaks for itself. Now, skepticism is skepticism. It's going to take concrete proof to get skeptics to be kind of warm to the idea. Listen, I've built my career on breaking boundaries and trying new things and getting people comfortable with new ideas. It's hard, but at the end of the day, if it's linked to a material business outcome, right, your chances of getting adoption of it are much higher than just saying we're going to give this a shot for just because it's a cool thing to do. All the cool kids are doing it, so we should too.
I love peer pressure, you know?
What about, let's have a scenario where the CEO is supportive of your AI initiatives. And
Sure.
I know you had slides saying that people are more trustworthy of businesses, but in particular, like their own CEOs.
Yep.
Have you had any examples of when you would need to encourage a CEO to speak out, one that might be a little bit more shy?
Yeah, in fact, we deal with that all the time in just about every sector in which we operate, where CEOs really are struggling with figuring out where their permission space is to speak out on certain issues, whether that's current political events or that's like other events that they're very passionate about. And so I think one of the things that we do is CEOs love looking at data. We found in many of our fields, especially when we're looking at, say, consumer products and goods, they love seeing the data that's there when it comes to shy CEOs and speaking out. But number two, one thing that we also do is we also will survey the field and see what others are doing, what others are saying. Because while we don't recommend that organizations are just follower organization, it does help to know what the landscape looks like. And we do find that over time that executives and CEOs do feel more comfortable once they kind of get that rhythm going. I run from time to time, and it's like when you get in the pocket, you feel really good. You can go further, you can go longer, you feel comfortable. But the first few times you lace up, you're not always comfortable with that. And so you need to kind of figure out your way, and you need to be guided on your way to do something like that. The last thing I'll say here is I've also found, and I think we've found this over time, depending on how the executive team works and what their work style is that from time to time, sometimes just showing them and giving them like that demonstration of what things could look like to prepare them for every eventuality is really helpful. I have before with some executives put a phone in their hand or an iPad in their hand or a computer in front of them and let them walk through the process of, say, using a new piece of technology or a new AI tool, for example, so they can feel comfortable with it. And the flip side, we've also gone through and said, here are the 17 scenarios that are possible if you speak out on this issue. And they're able to articulate, what they're worried about, for example. And so sometimes showing that we're prepared for anything is one really good way to make sure that a CEO who is more tentative to make a move, which isn't always a bad thing, can feel confident with that move. Oftentimes, the tentative comes from a need to protect the brand and the organization, but more often than not, that comes from the need to protect the employees that are working with that CEO. So the frontline team members, the junior associates, the people who love working for that organization. And so the last thing a CEO wants to do is manufacture a crisis by mistake. So often we find giving that data, providing those scenario plannings across the board and helping them get their sea legs over time with repeated action and case studies is generally a really good way to get some more timid and shy CEOs to move forward into their permission space. Yeah,
I completely agree. I mean, if communicating and the environment links directly to the values, behaviors, and actions that that brand or business has exhibited in the past, right, then you are operating well within that permission space. But if not, right, research is going to be your best friend. And understanding what your stakeholders, internal and externally, expect from you, but more importantly, what your employees and what your customers are really anticipating from you, because that unspoken kind of compact between you and your stakeholders is often not as clear as it should be with a lot of CEOs and organizations. So being able to really understand the foundation of the values the companies or the organization was built on, and then being able to strategically engage in this like really uncertain external environment. Research can often be the link between successfully navigating this and truly living up to your values and the architecture that your business and the foundation that your business was built on, or like Jeremy said, unnecessarily manufacturing a crisis. But research has proven to be one of the most useful tools when determining what the permission space is, but more importantly, what the message is and who the messenger should be.
Great advice. All right, final question, unless any more trickle in. This one came in earlier while I think you still had the slides up on the screen.
Sure.
They asked, what is considered an innovation? Yeah, your slides mentioned GMOs. Like, why is that considered an innovation?
Yeah, I had asked the same question when our trust team was first talking about this data. And the reality is, when people look at a list of things that they think has been fiddled with by a human hand to make it either better or enhance the product, they think of it as an innovation. So when we were surveying, GMOs was on the list because it is something that has been modified by science. And so that's why GMOs really made the list. I think one of the biggest things here is that whenever we bring something new out, whether that be the obvious innovations like sliced bread, for example, industrial revolution technology, AI, for example, like people automatically say that's an innovative process. But it also could be as simple as something like the 5-day work week, for example, because consumers also feel innovations are like a 6-day work week, like Samsung is trying right now, or a 4-day work week, which we're seeing is being tested in some places. So it really depends on how you look at it. But innovation, generally something that has been tinkered or built with human hands that is going to impact my life in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Jeremy. I think one of the key things and what we've learned from research lately is that innovation is almost a negative trigger right now for audiences. They don't have a clear understanding of what innovation means and in what sector. What tests incredibly well now in terms of messaging around innovation is R&D. Research and development speaks to technological innovation and advancement without becoming jargon or a buzzword that's been overutilized, right? So innovation can be framed very easily as research and development within specific sectors, but also across the board. So your first question is absolutely right, because we struggle with it all the time. Like, what is innovation? Like, it's just a meaningless word right now. That could mean a lot of different things. So when we're talking about R&D and investment in advancing the business through the use of technology, right, and breaking breaking new ground, that's innovation, right? And it can be applied to aerospace and defense, to pharmaceuticals and drug manufacturing, to EVs, and across the board. So GMOs, yeah, I think that Jeremy's right. It was like, what is innovation? Well, let's look at the 4 most common sectors and link them over. But GMOs are, there was a time when GMOs were, it was called Frankenfoods. Does everyone remember when innovation in food was Frankenfood, using science to modify cells? Not to dismiss that they've fed millions, billions of people around the world with genetically modified organisms through like the history of mankind. But GMOs took on, like AI is, this negative connotation on what does it really mean and how scary is it. So I think we need to pivot AI like we did Frankenfoods and into something more relatable and positively beneficial to humanity.
Yeah, no more Terminator movies. Actually, I love Terminator movies, but it didn't help, right? I mean, the reality is when people thought AI, they're like, oh, Skynet. So
I don't think I have it in me for another Terminator movie. There's been
I remember seeing Judgment Day in theaters. It's great.
Well, I think that wraps it up in terms of questions. That was great that we could make the parallels between GMOs and AI. It sounds like AI is going to be solidly within that innovation category for a long time to come. Before we wrap up, just wanted to remind everyone that this session will be recorded and sent out to everyone. Jeremy, Aaron, is there anything, any parting words you want to say?
No, listen, I really appreciate the Quorum team inviting Jeremy and I to speak today. If anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to Jeremy or myself. He and I are partners in the Government and Public Affairs business unit of Edelman called the EGA. And I really appreciate you attending. Jeremy, I'll pass it over to you. Anything else?
I think, Aaron, you closed this out very well. Thank you, everyone, for your time. It was such an honor to be here. And please reach out. We're friendly. We don't bite.
I'll talk to you later. Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.